You see the most hyper successful men in the world. None of them are without competitive spirit. None of them are just going to lie back and take it. They're all impulsors. None of them are compulsors. They're all in tune with the competitive spirit that they have. And that's what makes them hyper successful.
If you are not able to control this limbic friction, right? What happens to the decisions that you're going to make in your life? Who's making the decisions? Is it your weakness making the decision? Or is it that limbic friction making the decision? And then what happens to the number of decisions that are not in your favor? You're screwed for life. If you don't face the fire, if you don't know what fire feels like, when you meet somebody who's capable of fire, you don't even recognize it. A lot of people can sit here and say, oh, push up isn't the mark of being a fit guy. This isn't the mark of being a fit guy. Shut the fuck up. You can't do 50 push-ups. You have no right to even say that. If you can do 50 push-ups, then I'll have the conversation.
Absolutely. Number one, that.
Right? Number one, do fucking 50 push-ups. A person who truly can withstand pain and has practiced withstanding pain will never be in a position of weakness to be compulsively putting themselves over somebody else. You could be in the worst situation ever, right? But a truly stoic individual is a person who realizes that no matter what happens, it is my responsibility to take care of this shit. If I am poor, it is my responsibility to get out of this without hurting anybody and without fucking anyone over. And that is respectable because it's difficult to do. How do you explain a person who doesn't have any control over their own self to be a good person for society? Because that person will always choose themselves over anybody else in society. And this is my whole concept of loyalty also. When I choose people to be in my close circle of family, I choose people who know what pain is. That person will not let you down. That person will not put themselves before anybody else. That's the kind of people I want fucking around me.
The aim of this podcast is to bring attention to what modern day humans ignore. Living lives in fabricated personalities, enslaved to compulsion. The facets of the human animal have to be rediscovered. We need to wake up. I am excited to bring you the Evolution Podcast.
Man, I've been loving the podcasts. I've been loving these episodes that we've been dropping. I have watched every single episode so many times now, and I feel like there should be an equal balance between how many guests we bring on and how many times that we have our own discussions, because a lot of people were telling me about having our own discussions too. They like our dynamic a lot. I can see how we lose on slight dynamics between us when guests are on, but it's always nice to have that balance, I think. And more so, my whole idea of bringing guests on is to educate ourselves and to educate the community on things that we don't really know, you know. It's always nice to have professionals speak about that. But, you know, having said that, we've really spoken about some amazing stuff, man, and I fucking love that. I love the frequency that we're at, one episode in 2 weeks. Some people might say we do a lot more. I think it's fine because, like, who I'm not sitting here trying to gain fans off this podcast. We're trying to do it at our pace. If we're having intellectual conversations that go so deep, there's only so many that you can keep doing every day, every weekend. It's not one of those things. I'm a quality over quantity over guy, so kind of guy. So I love stuff like that. What's your opinion on these past few episodes that we've dropped?
Well, it's like you said, there's sort of merit to everything that we're doing. And the whole point that we started this podcast was obviously because of the narrative that we have going on. But also, it's more like the guests fit into that narrative and they've got something to share and something of substance to add on to what we initially wanted to do and wanted to talk about in the first place, which the first two episodes are testament to that. And you know, the latest episode that we recorded together, I think that was fascinating. That was probably arguably one of the more realistic views of what our dynamic actually looks like when we're having a normal conversation. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, and particularly about the frequency thing you were talking about, or you've got like you can't force these things to happen. The way that we started this whole shebang all those years ago was because not because we were forcing each other to have conversation. It just turned out we were having really fun conversation, and some of those conversations lasted for hours on end. Some of those conversations not very long, but it always came out with substance and with value. And I think throughout all of the episodes that we've launched so far, I think there's 4 so far. Each one of them, like I was saying in the earlier episodes as well, all of them have these rewatch values, and you always pick up something new when you watch it for a second or a third time. So it's not just about like, hey, okay, I'm going to watch it the first time. Most people won't even be able to grasp the whole message, and they watch it the first time because of the way that we have these conversations. And there's no direct linear path that we take. There's always these analogies and metaphors and tangents and what have you. But we eventually sort of work on to the same theme, which is amazing. We're just kind of like bouncing around multiple of these conversations, whereas most people have a difficult time just having one of those conversations and keeping up with it. But I think that's the most valuable part of having this discussion that you and I have embarked on. It's a matter of not only telling people and explaining and helping people understand, but also leading from the front and actually showing people what it means to have intelligent conversation. I think that's the core message that people can take out of every conversation we have, for that matter.
Yeah, I hope people view it like that as well. I'm definitely sure there's some level of ego that we have in those statements that we make, but yeah, I couldn't give a fuck less. I'm having these conversations with people that I truly respect. You're one of those people, and the guests that we bring on are definitely people that we choose with quality, people who we're not just booking these random guests. There have been some guests who have reached out wanting to be on the podcast, even though they know there's no notoriety to it or so yet. But it's just, if you're not fitting the message, then there's no point of having you on the podcast. I'd rather have a discussion with someone I already think is, one of the most intellectual people that I know. And so, fuck it. I just want a fucking good conversation. I want to enjoy these conversations. And it's my fucking podcast. I do whatever I fucking want. That's the beauty of having your own podcast, right?
Damn straight.
Yeah, I'm not really trying to impress anybody. But the feedback has been great. So I guess we are. Dude, like actually a few people came up to me after I would say like quite a few people came up to me and they said that I always thought the stuff that we're saying can be misinterpreted for being said too much in the community, because some of the things, like for example, that we talk about discipline, there was a recent statement that I had made that said you cannot control your mind unless you gain your own respect. And in my yes, that's the way that I put it, and that's the way that I articulated it, and of course I have things to back it up in my own life. And I didn't feel like it could impact many people. It's just one of those things that I feel, and so I do. But people came back to me and said, like, that is so right, man. Like, nobody's put it like that. And that made me question it. Like, there's at least a few people who are listening to what we say and have never heard it before. Which perplexes me, because I guess the people that we surround ourselves with are speaking of similar things. So it sounds like, it's always kind of happening. But you tend to underestimate how many people don't really surround themselves with people like us and with the thoughts that we have. And it's been super fascinating to hear that from people. And I feel like if there's at least there's 20, 25 people, 30, 40 people watching this and feeling like they've never heard it before, then I'll keep doing it for a long time. And I love hearing people come back to me and say those things. But speaking of discipline, like fuck all this shit. Speaking of discipline, I texted 10 of my boys recently. Okay. 10 people that I consider my boys. And it was a reel from Instagram, and the reel was drop down and do 50 push-ups right now. And fucking 3 people got back to me and they actually were able to do the 50 push-ups. The other bitches, bro, they gave up at 10 push-ups, 20 push-ups, 30 push-ups. And I got so pissed. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing with your life? 50 push-ups? You can't do 50 push-ups? Like, forget one set, but in your whole fucking day, you can't do 50 fucking push-ups.
Yeah.
And I got really mad at that.
Oh,
And I was
that's
like, what
mad.
the
I thought you
fuck
were
is
talking about
going
just a
on?
single set. Never mind.
Well, then I got down and I did like a set of 50 push-ups and I sent it to them and I was like, you're pathetic if you can't do fucking 50 push-ups. Forget forget in one
Mm.
set, but in general you can't do 50 push-ups, and I did it in under 1 minute and I sent the video to them with the disappointment, and I said, "Don't go to fucking sleep without doing these push-ups." And yeah, man, I just like, why aren't you surrounding yourself around people who are checking you like that? That's one of my pet peeves with people who don't want to work hard. Because, dude, anybody who's I've been in that position where I couldn't even do 5 push-ups. But I know for a fact that if I did that 10 times in the span of like 3 hours, I'd get it. But people aren't even like willing to put that time in,
Yeah.
and how are you going to respect yourself? You can't do 50 fucking push-ups. You're a piece of shit. You can't do 50 push-ups, bro. That's
I it's you know again, the reason I point that out is because, you had to check me from checking myself from checking you from you having checked me in the beginning, I think, from having said that, because the reason that I make that exclamation is because now it's sort of like, yeah, it's second nature. You do it. It's part of the regimen. So par for the course. It's like, sure. But again, like you say, there was a point in my life as well where you don't start off just off the bat knowing how to do 50 push-ups. You always have to like learn to crawl before you run, and to walk, or whatever you have. But I think engaging again to the point of discipline is where, oh, obviously, this is one of the more sort of widely understood aspects of discipline, or applications of discipline, where people think of, okay, I need to get into a workout regimen, keep healthy, keep fit. Fitness regimens usually where they tend to push this and drive the nail into the coffin of having discipline. But I think what's important to recognize here is, as well, is that the discipline, or the discipline didn't come because of the workout regimen. It's this idea of having this inherent discipline, and for building your discipline separately and then working it into your the other aspects of your life, such as a workout regimen, such as complications like this. I think the disappointment that you're feeling, of course, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the disappointment that you're feeling is not as much because they didn't or they couldn't do it, but more that it's just that these are not people that you found yesterday. These are not people that came into your life yesterday. These, like you said, you prefaced it by saying these are your boys. These are people that you've surrounded yourself, or at least they've had the grace of having you surround them for a long enough period of time for you to make that sort of statement. So I think the disappointment comes more from like, the fuck have you been doing with your life while I've been away, or while we've not been in touch? Just because I'm not there to fucking whip you every time you're on the ground doesn't mean that you're not going to keep up these things for
yeah.
yourself. So this idea of discipline needs to be like self inculcated, and it needs to come from within. It's something that people need to know. Like, what was it you were saying earlier that someone said to you about that statement you made on discipline?
The statement was, in order to be in control of your mind, you must first earn your own respect.
Yeah. So you must first earn your own respect. And I think that sort of really summarizes, and I don't know if it necessarily resonates with people or not. And even if it does resonate with people, it's probably from a very egotistical standpoint where they're like, oh, I need to earn my own respect, therefore I need to do something respect worthy, this and that. But no, just a matter of the example of that discipline example that we were talking about. It needs to come from within. You build that discipline, you build that regimen, and then you incorporate it into the rest of your life. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for a fitness regimen. That's, like I said, it's what's most widely sort of, it's the idea that's propagated most widely, it's more commonly used. But you instill yourself with that idea of discipline, and you instill yourself with that attribute. You can use it for any portion of your life. I remember we were having this conversation the other day where we were talking about a aspect of, I think we were talking about it in reference to a very um, simple sort of analogy that, like a parable that would just happen. Is like, I don't want to dig into my drive or my motivation or my you know that mindset in order to keep myself to do things or make myself want to do things. I don't want to always keep pushing back and pulling from that reservoir, because I fear that someday I'm going to overuse it and it's going to run out. So you want to save that for different things. And you replied saying, well,
Mm.
that's why you have discipline. That's why you have that fallback attribute. So you can apply it to all these different facets of your life without having to always rely on self motivation. Of course, people that rely on a separate source of motivation, they have a whole different fucking problem. And they have a whole different world of pain that they need to get over before they even consider developing this discipline. But just in the context of people wanting to develop discipline and people like that who are like shocked to hear it for the first time and they never made that connection, again, don't take it from an egotistical standpoint. Don't look at it being like, oh, I need to sort of earn my respect in by doing great things. No, great things don't happen overnight. And it's even if you did manage to conjure one up, it's going to be a one-off thing. How long are you going to ride that wave? Use that drive to build discipline. And that's the way that you go about being better and exceeding at all of these other things. So yeah.
I think you absolutely hit the nail with saying that I'm more disappointed that these are my boys who haven't been up to that mark where they've kept their fitness in check, where I'm checking back on them and I'm asking them to do something and they're not able to continue that task. That is very, very accurate, bro.
Yeah.
It hurts to look back and talk to these boys and like hit them up and say like, hey man, are you fucking fit? You're not? You can't do 50 push-ups? What the fuck? Of course, like a lot of people can sit here and say, oh, push up isn't the mark of being a fit guy. This isn't the mark of being a
Yeah.
fit guy. Shut the fuck up. You can't do 50 push-ups.
That's
You have
not
no
the
right to
point.
even say that. If you can do 50 push-ups, then I'll have the conversation with
Absolutely.
you.
Number one, that.
Right? Number one, do fucking 50 push-ups. Secondly, for people secondly, for people who don't feel like they can even get to that point to get rid of that laziness first and then do 50 push-ups. I was talking about this as well with one of my friends, is that you have to fucking get your mind in order first. The action doesn't happen before you want it to happen. You need to make it happen in your head first, and then you dive straight into it, and then it happens. But if it doesn't happen, you don't just give up like a bitch and then just leave it be. You have to fucking be strong about that. You have to create the reality in your head first. You have to dream about being able to do it. Then you get the fuck up and then you go do it, and then it will make it happen. One thing that might help a lot of people who are listening is that some days I'm about to hit like 200, 300 push-ups and I can't make it because my goal is 200 to 300 push-ups. And it doesn't work. I start to feel fatigued. Yeah. I won't give up, but I will start to feel fatigued by 170, 200, 250. And then instantly all I do is I say, okay, the goal is 500. And then easily, with no effort, 300 is just, it's done now. And I'm hitting 350, 370. Like it's fucking nothing. It's that goal that you have to create that reality in your mind. You can't just aim for 50. Then of course you'll get like fucking 30 push-ups and then you'll give up. You know what one of my friends said when for their excuse for not doing the push-up? They said, I had dinner and then I was way too full to do it afterwards. That pissed me off even more. Why the fuck did you eat in between? If you can't fucking do 50, you had 20 more to do and you ate food and now that's your excuse. I feel like saying you don't deserve to fucking eat if you don't like finish a task like that. And I did say that. Fucking hell.
I mean, of course, we're using push-ups because, well, we're using push-ups because it was part of the whole thing that started this frustration in the first place. Is that but the more you think about it, right, it's such a basic regimen. It's such a basic movement exercise. Yeah, you push yourself off the ground. That is the cardinal rule of a push-up, right? There's form, there's structure, everything else that goes into it. At the basis of it, a push-up is push your body weight off the ground, and it's not even your whole body weight. It's about how much whatever body weight you can put. It's about 75%, 85% of your body weight. That's the only thing that you can add on to it. All we're asking you to do, push yourself off the ground. And once again, we're admitting that it doesn't start overnight, right? This is something that happens from you starting from zero. In the beginning, it might sound as easy as I've just put it. But when you go to performing the actual exercise, you realize, wow, this is much harder than I think it is. You put things into perspective, put both of those things together. What you're basically saying is you can't even push your own body weight off the floor once. And then we're asking you to do that for 50 reps. And this is including the proper form and the structure and everything, which makes it arguably harder than just pushing yourself off the ground. So when you use that whole perspective to sort of understand where this frustration is coming from, you start to realize that, oh yeah, what they're asking for is quite a basic thing, but at the same time, it's harder than it sounds, and that means people, or out of these 10 people, only 3 of them were able to fulfill the actual criteria to do a basic form of, exercise 50 times in the span of a day. Is that what you said? The span of a day? Okay, great. Which is where the sort of, the surprise came from when you say, oh, you mean like in a set or in a couple of sets, whatever. That makes more sense to me. So this is again where you kind of have to tie in this idea of discipline, not just discipline, but that reality check that you need to give yourself. That when you said you need to learn to respect yourself, this is where you start raising the question. When you put that into perspective and bring it back into this respect situation, how can you respect someone who's not capable of doing what I've just described as arguably one of the easiest exercises that I can, and in the easiest way possible? The basic objective of the exercise is so simple. It's not asking you to do some weird flips in like some, calisthenic gymnastic routine. It's way more complex. It's way more dynamic. All I'm asking you to do is push yourself off the ground, and you put yourself in someone's shoes who can't do that, and you imagine, do you respect that person?
Fuck, even not being able to do it is one thing. Sorry to cut you off, but not being able to do it is one thing, and then giving up is another thing. If you struggled for 10 push-ups and you said fuck it, no matter what happens, I'm going to finish this 50, then you will be proud of yourself. And caveat, right? The people that I sent this to aren't people who are looking at it and being like, he told me to do 50 push-ups, why do I have to do? No. Like I told you, these are my boys. They respect what I tell them to do, and if they want to do it, they will do it. But it comes down to the fact that I can't do 50 push-ups, and you accepting that for your own self, for whatever fucking reason. The reason of saying that your stomach was full, it boils my blood. I just want to slap the shit out of them, bro. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Why is so what? Your stomach is full and you can't do 50 push-ups? Bro, fuck it. It's not about the act of the push-up itself. Yes, of course, that's the most basic thing that you should know how to do.
Yeah.
Whatever you said, and rightly so. And then the next part is fucking, I will do it. No matter how long it takes, I will do it. Even if you failed, right? Even if they thought, okay, it is one set, and they did like 30 in one set. Or fuck it, they did 8 in one set. After that, don't you have like the shame to get up and be like, okay, I'm going to do another set. Doesn't matter. Just because I didn't hit 50 in one set doesn't mean I can't do it another time. This is this mindset. It goes deeper, and it's not as surface as we're saying, right? I'm the kind of guy who makes everything fucking deep, but rightfully so. There is deepness in everything that occurs, and if you had to fucking break down what's really happening, you have no fucking respect for yourself when you're not finishing the task. You have no ability to override limbic friction, and that is a serious problem. It's not the fact that you're not doing 50 push-ups. It's the fact that you have no control over your mind. You have no fucking control. You have no say.
Yeah.
Your stomach is full and your mind says rest. Oh, so you need to rest. The whole day you didn't do any fucking push-ups. But this one fucking time that you're supposed to do it, that's the time that you need to rest most. That's the time that you have to go and fucking eat dinner. That's the time that you have to do everything apart from that. You have no control over your mind, and that is a serious fucking issue, because you will fail at life in every single aspect of it. Your wife will leave you. Your girlfriend will leave you. Your fucking parents will be disappointed in you. You will be disappointed in yourself. You will procrastinate your whole fucking life. You will make no money. All of it comes down to mind control. If you cannot control your mind, then you're fucked. And we haven't really hit this topic like this in this approach before, because we're focused on the topics at hand, right? But this is a huge topic that we've kind of skimmed over for a bit in these last few episodes. But it's finally something that is on my mind today, which is why I brought it up in the first place. And then another thing is, if you are not able to control this limbic friction, right? What happens to the decisions that you're going to make in your life? Who's making the decisions? Is it your weakness making the decision? Or is it that limbic friction making the decision? And then what happens to the number of decisions that are not in your favor? You're screwed for
Yeah.
life.
It's this idea of being you need to be an impulsor, not a compulsor. And I think that's a very important distinction to make because most people, in the way that you described, are subjugated to this limbic friction and they become what we now understand are compulsors. They're compulsed and they're driven by their primitive desires. And that compulsion drives them to do and make these decisions where they think they're making a rational decision when they're not. Case in point, de facto, I am almost certain that most people that have heard you just describe this thing with such passion and with such fervor are going to take it personally. The number one reason they're going to take it personally is because they're compulsed by their reason to react to certain things because they feel they're personally attacked by it. And even though everyone knows full well that offense is such a subjective thing, instead of saying, I feel offended because I have no respect for myself, they will translate that into being, who the fuck are you, cocky son of a bitch, to tell me that
Mm,
I can't do 50 push ups and that's my problem, not
mm,
yours, first
mm,
of all. So that's one distinction that needs to be drawn. Being an impulser means that you command what you do and you can drive your impulses in a certain way, which might sound contradictory, but distinguishing it between compulsion. As a compulsor, you're a victim. As an impulser, you're the strategist. You're the one who chooses when to use what to your desired effect. Case in point, again, we were talking earlier in the conversation of, look, I don't want to keep reaching back into my bag of tricks and diving into that motivation every single time. And you replied with, that's where you have the discipline in. That's an attribute you develop. So either way, we were still talking about being an impulsor, not a compulsor. And one last thing that I really think needs to be highlighted in this particular flavor of conversation is the idea of competition that's been lost in society. And there's a lot more that I could
mm,
say about it, and there's a lot more that goes into it. But this competitiveness that people have, especially in males, like you and
mm,
me, like masculine males, proper males who are in tune with their masculinity, they have these inherent drive. What you see very common, and this has been studied to a large extent as well, the way that which our agreeableness far sort of competition rather far outweighs our agreeableness, which is why it might sound distasteful sometimes when we start feeling that masculine energy and then you see a bunch of guys together all like driving and thriving in testosterone and they're just hanging around doing something. Maybe they find a ball, you find a hoop, you're like, all right, let's go shoot some hoops. Friendly conversation aside, the switch flips and you're in a mode of competition and you're like, yes, I want to do it, I want to be the better guy, I want to score more baskets. It's a very juvenile example, but you get the point. That sort of competitiveness can be translated to a lot of different ways and a lot of different facets in life. Those are the kind of guys you see the most hyper successful men in the world. None of them are without competitive spirit. None of them are just going to lie back and take it. They're all impulsors. None of them are compulsors. They're all in tune with the competitive spirit that they have, and that's what makes them hyper successful. And that competitive spirit is also the key player that fucking plays into this idea of developing discipline. And that analogy and that concept that you just pointed out in that example, where you said, do you not feel shame that you're not able to complete the task at hand? Only people with that competitive spirit or the a sense of competition are going to even want to do that task in the first place, let alone do anything else. But yeah, I rest my case.
That's a brilliant point that you brought up, and thank you for bringing that up because I almost missed it. Not only is it healthy competition that takes place, the more that takes place, the more healthier that you will be. This is studied for a long fucking time, and
Yeah,
it's nail in the
yeah,
coffin. There is no going around it. For men and for women, healthy
yeah,
competition boosts testosterone, and testosterone is equally important as in females and in males. And one of the biggest things that makes
yeah,
you a full-fledged male is competition. Not only that, but winning competition. For the people out there who think that competition isn't
yeah,
important, and for the people out there who think that winning competition is not the most important thing, I agree. It might not be the most important thing. Nobody's setting bias like that, but it is important, and it is wrong of people to say that that is not what human nature is supposed to be, which brings me to a very important point that Robert Greene
Yeah.
makes in the philosophy of Stoicism. Being kind, being a good person as a citizen, and being a natural provider and caretaker for the community that you reside in is not a natural trait for evolution. It's actually not biologically present in us to be like that. This is one of the principles of Stoicism, right? And the the part where the importance lies is the fact that you have to override that thing. Naturally, what happens in the wilderness is you are competitive, right? One is you're competitive, and in the wilderness, you're not trying to be healthily competitive. You are fucking competitive, and you're competitive to the death. That's how you were programmed.
Of course.
You are programmed to win. You are programmed to defeat, and you are programmed to do all of these things that are not necessarily considered what a good citizen would do. But the principle is the fact that you can recognize that as a human being and override that and then defeat it and then function as a person who's still kind, still good for the society is what puts respect on it. That's why it's a respectable trait, because you are overriding something. You are overriding heavy compulsion, right? And like Robert Greene really put that well in his way. And I suggest everyone who's listening to go and check that out, because I didn't exactly quote what he said, but he put it very beautifully. And that's so true, bro. Like, that brings me to the question of, if you aren't strong as a man, if you aren't capable to override that limbic friction, I truly believe you cannot be a good man. And I feel like everything that happens bad in society from men and women come from people who are weak, people who cannot control anything that goes on in their mind. The school shooters, the rapists, the robbers, the thieves, all of these people, I feel, you could be in the worst situation ever, right? But a truly stoic individual is a person who realizes that no matter what happens, it is my responsibility to take care of this shit. I don't care if I am poor. It is my responsibility to get out of this without hurting anybody and without fucking anyone over. And that is respectable because it's difficult to do. But to be able to override that requires strength. Where does that strength come from? From practicing shit like this. From being able to not bitch out from 50 push-ups. If you can't do that, if you can't do these daily tasks, including everything else that you are procrastinating in life, to what truly matters, then how are you ever going to be someone that is good for society? A lot of people have that misconception in my circle, even. The misconception of not being a competent person and being a disagreeable person is actually a valuable trait for community, apparently, nowadays. Fuck that. Are you kidding? How do you explain that? How do you explain a person who doesn't have any control over their own self to be a good person for society? Because that person will always choose themselves over anybody else in society. A person who truly can withstand pain and has practiced withstanding pain will never be in a position of weakness to be compulsively putting themselves over somebody else. And this is my whole concept of loyalty also. When I choose people to be in my close circle of family, I choose people who know what pain is. And that's why we get along so well, because one of the first things that happened in our conversation is we shared our struggle and we shared the experiences that we came up with. And I instantly knew that you knew what adversity meant. I instantly knew you knew what betrayal meant. And what that means is that, and then on top of that, I knew that you were a guy who would work hard and achieve what he wanted to do. All of those things are not just desirable traits to be like, oh, that's a cool guy, I want to look up to him. Why do you think people look up to him? There's a fucking huge reason, and there's a reason that people are programmed to like such things as well. It's because that person will not let you down. That person will not put themselves before anybody else. That's the kind of people I want fucking around me. I don't want people who don't understand how to put somebody else before them. That is what, in my opinion, is a true loyal human being. And that goes for any situation, not just physical, like I'll put myself in front of a bullet for you. It's about anything, any argument that you have with a person,
Yeah.
any misunderstanding you have with your close relative. If you sense that nature of trying to argue to win the conversation, I immediately get turned off. I immediately smell that fucking
Yeah.
viciousness. And it might not be malicious because it comes
Yeah.
out of weakness, because these people need therapy, all that. Yes, fine, maybe, whatever. Get the fuck out of my face. But the fact is, you cannot put me in before you speaking when I am putting your feelings before me speaking. And that speaks wonders about how much you will stay by my side when I need you. It comes down to the smallest of things. All of it is related.
So I think just one way to clearly, properly summarize all of that, leading up from competition to loyalty, is the goal is not to win every game, but to be invited to play every subsequent game. And the only way you can accomplish that is if you have a proper and thorough understanding of everything that you've just said, basically, and you've pointed out. And these are all important facets in different ways. But you see, if people were paying attention to your conversation, which I really hope they were, because there's so much insight that went into it, there's different ways in which you played around with the word competition. And there's different ways, healthy competition, yes, but there's different ways in which you played around with it and you put it into different scenarios and used it to explain the relative understanding and the ability of different individuals in different facets or in different meanings of someone else's life. In this case, their relevance to your life and the way that they've depicted it and the way that they've chosen to play the game, so to speak. And if we consider every other situation to be a game, only the most competing people come out of it on the flip side of it. And the reason that, again, you were pointing out that there's a reason why people are attracted to these kind of traits. There's a reason why people are attracted to these sort of nuances that not necessarily they don't necessarily stick out to everyone, but it sticks out to the right people. And it takes one to know one. You can't just have anybody, because if that was the case, then the story would be completely different. Everyone would try to, in fact, mimic it. There would be millions and millions of YouTube videos trying to explain, oh, these are the 9 best fucking tricks to get yourself to be liked by everyone or whatever, because now they would have figured it out. There is some kind of pattern to it. Fact of the matter is, even just to recognize that someone has these facets and to recognize that someone has these capabilities, it takes a minimum amount of effort from yourself, which again is derived once again from this idea of discipline and the self-respect and the need to value yourself over your egotistical pride. Because we've all met these kind of people in our lives where we just walk around and they mold themselves and they shape themselves into the situation that they're put into because they think that that's the premise of the conversation and that's the dynamic and that's the sort of conversation that will get them the most sort of attention. So that's the easiest kind of person to be, you know, that's the first kind of person rather to come up to you and be like, oh, you're such a big deal because of XYZ reason. But the reason that they have, the reason that it takes the right person to address these qualities is because they've already went through these developmental processes themselves. But yeah, that's just my opinion. What would you reckon?
If you don't face the fire, if you don't know what fire feels like, when you meet somebody who's capable of fire, you don't even recognize it.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, no, there's this video I was watching with 2 people who were talking about hypnotism, and I think it was Charles Manson actually who was the hypnotist, and there was this guy
No
who
fucking
was
kidding. Are
saying,
you serious?
yeah, Charles fucking Manson, bro. So he was in jail with this other
Fuck me.
dude who was in jail as well, and they were trying to get hypnotized by
Mm.
Charles Manson. And so Charles Manson asked one of the guys, is like, have you done heroin before? Or have you done any other type of opioid? He said, yeah. And so he hypnotized them and he made that person trip on heroin without ever taking heroin, like without taking heroin at that moment. But he was tripping on heroin through hypnotism because he just put himself back into that mindset that he was in when he was tripping. And then he moved to another guy and he was asking,
That's
like, why didn't
insane.
it work on this guy? It didn't work on that guy because he's never taken heroin before. And so he said, Charles Manson said, if you've never felt what
Mm.
it feels like to be on heroin, you will just snap out of it. You can't trip on it. And so if you have to use that as an analogy in this matter, it's the same thing. If you've never been in a position before of struggle and overcoming it, you will never be able to recognize that feeling, and you will just snap out of it like you snap out of life. And that's, I've been in that position, and that's why we know it so well. You've been in the position where you didn't understand it. That's why you know it so well. That's what happens when you put yourself among situations that teach you something in life. And if you're not able to do that, if what you're searching for is instant gratification, you're a slave to everything around you. And it is a horrible situation to be in. And I used to have some kind of sympathy for those people. Now I don't anymore, because, and it's not the opposite of sympathy. I just don't sympathize with that anymore, because it's a clear choice. There's a clear choice to make, and you're not making that choice for whatever
Yeah.
reason, and that puts you in a position of distrust in my eyes.
Yeah. And once again, I think it's important to highlight here again that most people, I'm sure majority of people, not that I'm trying to reinforce this idea, but because I just want to point out that I am right when I say this, that I'm going to look at it and every time it's just going to be like, okay, don't sympathize. So what? Doesn't matter what you think. Why are you being so this or that? Why are you being so bigoted? Why are you being so cocky? It's coming from a position of the reason that you don't want to sympathize with that anymore is because it's so evident, it's so obvious that you're being subjected and you're a victim to your compulsions, which is so easily mended. It's the same sort of
Exactly.
principle that we're using to describe discipline in terms of this completing the task in terms of these push ups. You know, that shame that you don't feel, that regret that you don't feel when you haven't completed it and you can just instantly snap out of it and start doing something else speaks towards your compulsions. This idea that you're going to look at it from a surface level and accuse the person who's pointing it out to you when you don't like being, reality checked. That's the biggest sort of indicator that you can have that there's something wrong inherently, that you're being compulsed to make these decisions, and we can't keep reiterating it how fucking true that is.
I would be doing you a disfavor if I sympathized with you when you were victimizing yourself, because that would put you deeper into this hole. And the only reason I can say this with so much confidence is because I've been that exact same motherfucker who's done that. I was that idiot who victimized myself and didn't get off the couch and didn't complete the task at hand and blamed everybody else for it. I've been that guy, and I've concluded that it was depression. I concluded it was all this bullshit. And the only thing that got me out of it was snapping out of it one day, just making that decision. That's the only way you're going to move forward. And so if that means that I don't give you sympathy, it's because I don't give you sympathy. A lot of people tell me, you know what, sympathy is hard to give. And I digress. It's actually one of the most easiest things for me to give sympathy. You know, it actually is way harder for me to not give sympathy to someone. For some reason, I've grown up being very sympathetic towards people that I see who are in sufferable positions. And this is how I naturally feel as I walk. When I look at people, I feel if you're in a bad position, then I actually feel bad. It takes more energy out of me to not sympathize with that situation, intellectually deciding that that's not what's best for you to right now, than to just simply be like, you know
Yeah,
what, man, it's okay. It's okay. And a lot of people will hear me talk like this,
yeah,
but a lot of people who know me in real life will be like, bro, you're actually not that harsh. That's what a lot of people will say, because I will say these things because this is what I feel. But it is harder for me to sympathize with people who I don't necessarily call family. But the people who I call family, I always make it a fact to not sympathize when it's not required, because I don't care how much energy I take to do that.
yeah,
If you're being put in a bad situation and I'm contributing to that by being a victim alongside with you, nobody is growing, nobody is moving.
yeah.
It's just not the right thing to do. I don't respect anybody who does that. It's not a good quality to have. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you trying to
Just
mediate
reinforcing.
in between this and trying to reinforce whatever. Like, fuck it, let it go, bro. People will understand what people will understand. Fucking, I don't, let it go. Don't worry about it so
All right,
much.
fair enough. If that's the case, then all of this, everything that's been said so far is definitely number one comes from a place of having experienced it for sure. Also, for me personally, comes from having being on the receiving end of, you know your ability to not sympathize while also sympathizing with people. And the fact that you never have to point out to me specifically, say for example, that you were doing me a disfavor if you didn't point out certain things, and it hit me a different way, and it made me think. I never thought of it as a very surface level thing. I never did, and the fact that you never had to point out to me just speaks more volumes towards what we were trying to state initially in this dynamic that we already had when we met each other for the first time, and that level of respect that naturally came to between one another in the first conversation that we had, because it could you could almost smell it off of each other, that whole competence that we had and that mutual respect just came from there. So again, these aren't traits that we developed overnight. We've not met each other for what, 19, 18 years of our life, and then we suddenly got together, and then the more we spoke about it after the night that we met, and then the more we spoke about it, the more we started realizing, then and only then did we realize that we came out from these very similarly distraught, difficult situations, but we both, the one thing in common that we both had is we both learned to pick ourselves off and move the fuck forward instead of reveling in our self pity, although we did do our fair share of that. The reason I point this out very specifically is because some people will come up and with this. It's a very fascinating notion to me. Some people will come up and say that, oh, it depends on the card you dealt, or it depends on how
Mm,
you chose to live life, or it depends on your experience.
mm,
No, it doesn't depend on what cards you were dealt. You never even bothered asking where you got those cards from in the first place. You don't even know what kind of cards you have. For all you know, you have four aces in your deck, you have all 32 aces, you have 52 aces in your deck. You
yeah.
don't know the cards you dealt. You're just saying, you're making the claim that it's different. Well,
Mm,
I'm here to tell you, we are basically the embodiment of two people who have lived different lives, but still came to the same conclusion, ideally, which is pushing us in a forward trajectory. And it
bro,
baffles me because I don't even know why I need to sit here and refute these points in the first place. But yeah, carry on.
bro, I was watching this podcast with Andrew Schultz and um, what's her name? Naomi
Yeah,
Park. Yeonmi Park. Sorry, my bad. Do you know who Yeonmi Park is?
no, I don't think so.
Yeonmi
Not
Park,
by name.
dude. Okay, Yeonmi Park is a woman who escaped North Korea, the dictatorship of North Korea, to America. She went
Oh,
through
is
the
she
most craziest shit.
is she the reporter?
No, no, no. She's not. No, she was a citizen of. I know who you're talking about, but
Okay.
that's not her. She was an actual citizen of North Korea as a child. And the things that she's reported, like I've seen a bunch of her interviews, and the first few things that she points out, bro, is that they used to eat rats because there was no proper food, and the rats used to eat the children
Fuck me.
in the same place. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is
Fuck me.
when she was escaping, I mean, and there's like, that's just one of the blasphemies that happened there for her, and for everybody else. And then she was escaping North Korea to China, and she had to cross a snow desert, a fucking ice desert, minus 15 degrees, when her whole body was freezing up. And she was saying like, if you took a breath, then your whole fucking throat would freeze up. The craziest shit that I've ever heard anybody go through. And then she made it out.
Yeah.
She came to America after being human trafficked, after her mom being human trafficked and everything. She comes to America and she becomes right wing. And now she's saying the craziest stuff. It's the funniest thing ever. Because what she's talking about, and by funniest thing ever, it's, I mean, fascinating. But she has been
Yeah.
asked to do documentaries about her struggle, and then include struggle of women, and include struggle of gender rights, and include struggle of like black people, and include struggle of all these other things that she's been asked to do. And she's like, I've refused all of it. It's very different. It's not the same thing at all, and I don't stand for some of these things, and it's not what I want to say at all. And she was like, I would rather not make a documentary if it means that I have to lie to people about taking a certain stance. And she is saying that all these people who are telling her that she is victimized, apparently these people are going to her and saying, no, you are a victim. They're telling her that she's a victim.
Okay.
And she's like, I understand I've been through shit,
Okay.
but I'm not
I've,
a
I've
victim.
I've heard of
I've been through
victim
the
blaming
fire.
before, but I've never heard of victim designation. This is new.
It really is the most fascinating thing happening in this year and day and age.
आपको पता नहीं है लेकिन आप है.
That's crazy. That's literally what they're saying.
Sorry, it was
That's exactly what they're
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
They're saying you don't know it, but you've been through it.
I'm interested to know how this played out. So let me get this straight. So she escaped, through all these absurd circumstances. It's already hard enough to wrap my head around. It's just I'm making fun of it because I can't comprehend what it is. Just comedic relief to get past this whole thing. But you see that she's gotten back into, let's assume, no, let's just call it what it is, like, real society. She's left this sort of dictatorship, and you're saying that she doesn't agree with most of the ideals that society stands on at the minute, or specifically what they're making her say.
Well, yeah, like some things that she was saying, um, were, I guess, could be considered left, and some things that she was saying could be considered right. But a lot of her points were based on
Yeah.
the fact that people are victimizing themselves way too much, and that she was saying like true victims don't really want to
Wow.
victimize
Okay.
themselves. True victims don't really stand there and
Yeah.
shout these things. When people have been through something, they
Yeah.
they excel in life. They go through some shit and then they come out winners. If they come out winners,
Yeah.
they don't talk like what she's seeing in America and what she's seeing in this day and age. She's like, the people are way too soft right now.
Right. Okay. Okay.
That's what she was saying, and that
Right.
like really, it put a nail in that perspective for me, because you would think someone who escaped North Korea and has come to America would like
Yeah.
slightly victimize herself and say that, oh, I've been through so much shit, you don't understand
Yeah.
what. None of that, bro. Her energy is so amazing. I was watching that and I was like, wow, I really need to look into this more and more. Like, her energy is so amazing. Her sense of humor is just on top of like so many things. She's so nice
Yeah.
and cute, and she's talking about all these funny things. At the same time, like, you can clearly see the level of struggle that she's been through underneath that. There's that underlying
Mhm.
darkness that you can clearly see, and
Yeah.
that is what I was trying to relate to your point, is that people who've been through that darkness come out and are very relatable
Yeah.
to people. You see it. But even looking at her spirit, having gone through all that, and then having to hear people saying that they ate too much food and they can't do 50 push-ups, is just, it's disappointing.
I knew that's where that was going. I knew exactly that's where that was going.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about, every time I say talk about this whole idea of respecting yourself, I'm instantly brought back to that phase that we shared at different points in our life, where you just like, you look at the man in the mirror and you're like, I don't like this guy. I
Mm,
genuinely don't. I don't know what's become of him. I don't know why this is this way. Well, for different reasons, not just because of the obvious, reflection in the mirror, but even past the reflection, you're just like, what is this? Is this really all I'm cut out to be? Is this enough for me? And that, if that doesn't irk someone, there's nothing stronger than that you can provide as a stimulus or as an example. If that doesn't irk you, looking at the man in the mirror doesn't irk you, then there's something inherently wrong with you. You're either a narcissist or someone that has some other fucking kind of issue.
yeah. This is the
Yeah,
fucking evolution podcast, bro. If we're not trying to evolve as people and we're still
yeah,
stuck here thinking about these small little things, there's no point even watching this podcast. I just,
yeah,
well, speaking of distress, this whole podcast, of course, we've put out a lot of distressful energy. And for the people who require to be distressed, please be distressed. Go do 50 push ups after this episode. And if you can't do it, struggle. But
Write back in the comments below how many of you actually
yeah,
followed through with it.
actually, yeah. And then probably also get chat on by some social warriors How dare you tell me that I'm not fit enough to do this? But the point of this
Well,
podcast is definitely still focused on evolution. It's definitely still focused on biological human evolution. And that doesn't leave the
yeah,
rhetoric of this podcast. However, we will have episodes when we discuss the things that we want to discuss, because it is our podcast. Do whatever we want. At the same time, we're not trying to waste
yeah,
your time with silly discussions. We're not trying to waste your time with
yeah,
unnecessary entertainment. This is none of that. What we want to talk about is serious. We have hopes for mankind that are in control of their limbic friction. We have hopes for mankind that truly want to create a community that moves forward, and this is what we're doing. This is the underlying rhetoric of every single episode, and it comes deep from my
yeah,
and your heart that we portray this image to everybody. There is no point of doing this podcast if that's not what we're aiming to
yes.
do. That's always at the forefront of my mind. Having said that, I'll see you in the next episode.